Hello, everyone. I have my microphone stick. Today, we're going to be talking about the high performance physiology method. This is a method that isn't really real yet. I'm not sure if the boys have acknowledged it on the podcast, but it comes from the High Performance Physiology podcast on Spotify. Details will be in the description. This is one of my favorite podcasts, and from this podcast, there has risen a rather clear method for organizing your training and gym work. This method is made in combination by Chris Beardsley and Coach Rob Mauseri. They are it's a duo podcast. Chris is obviously a very prominent physiology researcher. I think he's pretty happy just saying that he makes infographics, although he might have a PhD. Could be embarrassing because I should know a lot about him. Anyways, he also is doing the Transcend coaching course that I'm currently enrolled in. So I'm a really big fan of everything that Chris does. He is a very systematic thinker. He presents everything using physiology, which is undeniable most of the time. Really good to just base your training off fundamentals. Then we have Coach Rob, who is a strength and conditioning coach in America. He works with a big range of athletes and has more of that nuance where sometimes it matters, sometimes it doesn't. How can we actually put this into action to get a good training effect? Now let's talk about the actual high performance physiology method. The high performance physiology method is centered around a few different things. One of the biggest concepts is that speed training should be focused around the proximal to distal kinetic chain theory, okay? So that theory says that muscles that are more proximal on the kinetic chain, that means muscles surrounding the hip, shoulder, and core, are the ones that actually have the opportunity to exert force during dynamic and ballistic movements. Okay, so when we think about throwing, punching, sprinting, jumping, the musculature around the shoulder, core, and hips has the biggest opportunity to actually create movement, create speed, and exert force. So they are the ones that are going to be of the highest priority to us in our training. That is the proximal to distal kinetic chain. As we get further and further away, so we're thinking about knee joint muscles, elbow joint muscles, and then wrist and ankle, these muscles have lesser and lesser of a chance to actually create movement, exert force, and contribute outside of just transmitting force. So obviously elbow and knee, we're probably going to get some level of contribution, but less. Now, the other thing that is very important in the HPP method, the high performance physiology method, is fatigue, okay? So this is a really big consideration. Fatigue is literally what determines like half of the equation that determines performance. Performance is your actual ability minus fatigue. So it can take away a huge amount from training and performance if not managed properly. So how is it actually used in the method? First of all, we always prioritize our training that is most fatigue sensitive. So that's going to be our speed and plyometric work. Now, they normally say the stretch shortening cycle stuff can be placed after maximum strength, but we will talk about that in a second. So speed work is most sensitive to fatigue because if we have fatigue present, we cannot use an optimal motor pattern to then create our fastest and best mechanics. So we must do it first when there's no fatigue present so we can reach maximum contraction velocity and actually move faster than last time or move fast enough to improve our adaptations that are relevant. Next, we can go straight into max strength. So this is really important that it's next and that we don't hold on to our speed stuff too much because of course it can be fatiguing. There's really high eccentric force demands and you can be creating quite a lot of metabolic fatigue as well. So we don't want to overdo the speed work, but we don't want to do it first. And then we move quickly into our max strength work, where I've outlined, we're going to start with our proximal kinetic chain muscles, that being hips, core, and shoulders. Another aspect of the max strength portion is also ordering from concentric and shortened position focused exercises to lengthened and eccentric focused exercises. One of the biggest examples for this is going to be putting our eccentric overload at the very end of a session so that the massive amounts of calcium ion accumulation do not affect our training. Okay? We always want to do that at the absolute end of a session so that we do not inhibit our ability to really recruit muscles in our other exercises. So if you were to do a set or 2 or 3 of eccentric overload for your hamstrings, whether that's Nordic hamstring curls or your 2-to-1 on the hamstring curl machine, then if you were to then go and do hip thrusts or bench press or your ab crunches or your hip flexions, they would all be negatively affected by the hamstring curl. So that's just a trade-off you need to make. For some people, you might even do the hamstring curl in the middle because it's super important and you want to still get the most amount of coordination out of that, but normally not worth it. Then we can go into our stretch shortening cycle after our maximum strength. The way I like to do this is instead of doing a ton of calf work, we'll just do some ankle hops. Hello everyone, Future Evan here. I went on a huge tangent instead of explaining the stretch shortening cycle really well. We want to do this towards the end of the session because there are normally a lot of eccentric forces associated with this. When we have high eccentric forces, it can create a little bit more of intra-session fatigue. It will depend on the intensity that you do them at, but in general, it's just a good idea to do them towards the end, and you can still get a lot out of them because they will still be very quick ground contact times and require good coordination, which means you get better coordination. Thank you. Then after that, you can do isometrics because they are extremely easy to coordinate and they do not suffer too much from fatigue because you can still reach really high levels of recruitment. So that is the fatigue sensitivity side of things. The other thing you want to think of is actually the split and your training frequency. The only split you can run as a part of the high performance physiology method is going to be a full body twice a week. This is the only split that is really, really viable for athletes, especially those that are trying to get fitter and improve skills at the same time. If you're in the gym more than that, you're creating unnecessary levels of fatigue. Again, you say it's a buzzword to some people, but it's actually really important in this context. If we can get a minimum effective dose or slightly higher from our gym work and then leave a ton of energy or a lot less fatigue, then that means our conditioning and our skills work becomes a lot better, irrespective of whether you're actually doing a good job with that. Let's talk about the conditioning. My split that I want to do at the moment, I've been sort of fiddling around a little bit trying to find what I, using this method, would think is a perfect split or very close to perfect. At the moment, what I'm doing is a Monday gym session, a Tuesday run, a Wednesday zone 2, which is extremely light, literally recoverable within 6, like literally you could go and do it again. So there's no fatigue involved with that. That's great. Now, if the run, there's a little bit of post-workout fatigue from impacts, some glycogen depletion, but that bike session is so aerobic that will be next to no post-workout fatigue, and my gym session on a Thursday will not be affected because I go Monday gym, Thursday gym, and then in the AM and in the PM, I do another run, okay? This can be a lighter run, whereas your Tuesday can be harder. The Thursday run, somewhat lighter in the PM, so you have a little bit of time to get food in again. Full rest day Friday, so I can do a harder, less fatigued run on Saturday, and then have another full rest day before my Monday gym. This means that I have a full rest day or close to a full rest day before each of my gym sessions while still fitting in 4 whole cardio sessions a week. Then those gym sessions will have speed at the start of them. That's one of the big things of the HPP method is having speed before your gym sessions. Of course, I'm doing that. Now, for skills, if I was to do this for an actual athlete who is in training, because I'm just training, I'm not training with a team, that's a shame. Makes me look like a fraud. It doesn't make me look. It doesn't really change too much. It just depends on your priorities. Technically, you would want to be fully fresh for those Thursday sessions for the Tuesday, Thursday team trainees, that's commonly how it's ran, because that's your priority. You want to be fully fresh for your skills. You want to be fully fresh to perform and stand out. So then you have to track back from that, okay? Would want a full rest day the day before, and ideally nothing in the AM on the day of, because that is going to have some effect on your training. It's pretty hard to do this, and you're going to have to pick your poison. So in training, it's quite simple. If you can recover after a hard session on a Saturday or a comp on Saturday, you are either doing gym Monday, train Tuesday, gym Wednesday, train Thursday, and then rest Friday, repeat, or just jumping everything forward and going gym Tuesday, train Tuesday, rest Wednesday, gym Thursday, train Thursday. And then what I would do if you were going to do that is actually have some zone 2 on a Monday as a recovery session. It's a hard position to be in when you have to pick your poison. At the moment, I'm quite privileged because I'm just training in that way. But you can still perform at training. There's going to be some fatigue present. In a way, it's not fully peaking yet, so you can get away with it and still make great gains. And especially if you're training well and not creating a huge amount of post-workout fatigue, then it's not going to impact too much. But it's a hard place to be. Ideally, you actually do your speed during that gym session when you're not fatigued. And then, depending on what your coaching is like, if they have speed blocks, you don't want to overdo it then, and you can talk to them and hopefully sit out for that. There's so much that goes into it. And sometimes it's just, with a lot of athletes, they'll just fucking go and send. I have where does conditioning fit into this written down as a point. Now, I want literally my answer for what I'm doing at the moment to serve as the answer for that. Your gym sessions should be your primary because they actually make a huge difference, right? You're building your strength and you're building your speed. And if you're tired from conditioning, you will not get the most out of those. You can get tons out of conditioning with a fatigued body, okay? You don't need to be at 100% to go and run for 45 minutes at about a zone 3 pace, okay? You still get your stroke volume and your oxidative capacity because you still have a high oxidative demand. Your running mechanics might be slightly off. You may have slightly worse running economy, but that's literally it. Those are only performance things, really, where it might slow you down, but it doesn't stop you from actually getting a good training effect. Whereas that fatigue from the running does actually stop you from getting a good training effect in the gym. But one thing I did quickly want to touch on is actually with the speed. I made a post on this today. The maximum and minimum effective dose for sprinting is essentially the same thing. So when we're doing those resistance training, our gym session sprints, you're going for 2 or 3 good reps. So you may have a 10 to 15 minute long warm-up. I'm completely fine with that. You need to take care of your sprint warm-ups. But 2 or 3 good reps is all you're going for. You get the effect, you get to that 95% plus, and there's no more benefit after that. You're only going to get slower in each of those attempts because you simply cannot replicate that over and over again. Those type 2 X fibers or whatever they are, they're probably done after that, right? They are super fatigue sensitive, and there is no point going and pelting all your other muscles with that. So wanted to mention that. That's another little thing about speed that I think is important to know. Now I want to touch on some other popular training approaches. We're going to pull them apart. So if all you care about is the HPP method, feel free, click off now. If you are keen to sort of get a little bit more context around it, stay locked in. I have 3 that we're going to go through. The conjugate method, this is more of a gym-based one. The high-low method and traditional training. Okay, so our conjugate method is characterized by 3 defined phases or targets. These are max effort, dynamic effort, and repeated effort. Max effort will be when we are going for a really high effort, 1 rep max, 2 rep max, 3 rep max, a heavy single, double, or triple. And then doing accessory work, probably shorter and sharper. So we can extrapolate that to our sprinting where we are working for a few really high quality and really high effort reps, and then tapering off. Angus Bradley mentioned tempo running today, which I suppose I am okay with. And then for our dynamic effort, This is when we're doing more power work. So of course, power not super helpful, but it's sort of defined as faster, maximum intent, and normally with accommodating resistance to really stimulate a full acceleration throughout a rep and maximum effort all the way through. So this you could sort of define as, again, it's power training, it's doing your plyos, and it is also doing some resisted sprinting and that sort of thing. It's sort of, again, it's a bit of a no man's land where I would actually just stuff dynamic into the max effort, because that's what it is. It's max effort. You're still pushing hard. The velocity just changes slightly. And again, it's sort of going too slow to get our sprint adaptations that we want. Now, for repeated efforts, this is our classic 3 or 4 sets of 15 to 20 your endurance eagle sort of training. This is a training that's regarded as hypertrophy work, sort of endurance work. It's your accessory work. It's what's building the underlying capacity to allow you to do your dynamic and your max effort days. So it's just if we quickly touch on that, it's not quite how it works. We actually normally want max effort to create those capacity adaptations that allow for the dynamic and the max effort stuff. A classic setup for this is a 4-day split where you have day 1 and day 2 are max effort lower and max effort upper, and day 3 and day 4 are dynamic effort lower and dynamic effort upper. These sessions would normally go with a main lift using the day's method. So if you think about a max effort lower, could be a deadlift or a squat, working up to a heavy set of that. And then for the max effort, it obviously would be like a bench, or they might even define the deadlifters. So across the 4 days, the repeated effort would actually be split across. Part of the problem with this repeated effort being used as accessory work is it means we're stacking a ton of fatiguing exercises every single day. So even if you were to go Monday, Tuesday, rest Wednesday, Thursday, Friday for the uppers and the lowers for that sort of weekly setup, it means you're going to be carrying a lot of post-workout fatigue from a lot of high volume work across the week. That's probably one of the bigger problems with it, is that post-workout fatigue from really high volume, high rep training. What they do get right is they focus on quality. They focus on getting low volume of the important stuff and actually really good quality, but they let the accessory take away from it a little bit. They have really good variation and general training. This is actually a style that people who just want to feel good and feel fit might actually really like, because they feel like they're doing a huge amount of variety, being athletic, being strong, being dynamic. They are actually using jumps, throws, sled pushes, and some mobility work as well. Westside Barbell, any of their training clips, you can understand the sort of variety and holistic nature of the training. It's just the fact that they didn't quite have these exact sciencey, physiological explanations for everything. This is one of the better training methods and training approaches you can have, though. It's really not too bad. All you say is you just cut down the volume on your accessory work and you're in a really good spot for this, for any sort of training goals. Now for the high-low method, this is an interesting one that I actually screenshotted because I was going to change. You would set up a week as having a few high days and a few low days, and then potentially a full rest or an active rest day. The problem with this is that it's based on CNS fatigue and CNS demanding work. This is like your high effort stuff counting as being CNS demanding. It's such an arbitrary term, the fact that they say CNS fatigue, because it's just not a real fatigue mechanism. So if we look at our high days for them, this is speed and max strength. What do we know about these two? Well, we know that the speed work, it's good to prioritize, it's highly fatigue sensitive, and we want to do it first while we're fresh. But the max strength work is also important, and if we have fatigue present for that, it can hinder the actual training effect that we get from it. Now, on the high day, that's not going to bother at all. Okay, that's not a problem. But the low day definition is poor. We have upper body circuits, med ball days where you're not actually letting those fast twitch fibers rest, And you can be actually creating a lot of post-workout fatigue if we're thinking about a lactic circuit. Any sort of burn on a low day means you're probably creating quite a lot of fatigue for the following day. Think about the last time you did a repeat sprint session where your legs were on fire and then went to the gym the next day, okay? I've done that 100 times and pretty much never learned. You can do, and I have done this, you got to put some respect on it. I've done long runs that were incredibly slow. I've clocked like well over 14, 15 Ks and gone to the gym feeling not too bad. Whereas if you do 3 or 4 Ks with lactic in the legs the whole time, it is a different sort of fatigue, okay? And that's true. One is we're talking about glycogen depletion, and one we're talking about super high levels of muscle damage from a shit ton of metabolite accumulation, okay? 2 different fatigue mechanisms that lead to 2 different types of fatigue in the following days, okay? That was a huge tangent, but this is why that's sort of why the high-low method is flawed in that way. You could say the exact same about the conjugate, but that just came to mind. So with the high-low method, it's targeted specifically at sprinters, and it ignores the fact that gym sessions should be paired with speed. They still do, like I said, max strength on the high days, but we also want to think about hypertrophy and what's good for strength. So I'm guessing their max strength days would look like a lot of Olympic lifting and jumping. Yeah, one of the big positives from the high-low method is it's high and low. There's no middle ground in theory. There is in reality, but in theory, the concept is good. If you can actually set up a high-low split for yourself, I would be thinking the HPP method, bro. It is literally a high-low method in itself, but better, okay? We're acknowledging the fatigue sensitivity, we're working around it, prioritizing it, and still getting what we need out of it because we're training with a little bit lower volume of the speed, okay? There'll normally be 3 speed days, and if we can cut that down to 2, that's still minimum and maximum effective dose, if you've been paying attention. Now, traditional training. This is our last point for our splits, and then we're all done. Hang in there, guys. So let's just go through some of the big problems I see with traditional training. Speed days, training like a bodybuilder, and training like an athlete. So speed days, again, comes back to the fact that our maximum and our minimum effective dose is the same thing. I'm going to keep saying this now since I thought of it today. You cannot get much more, keyword, because I'm sure you can get a tiny little bit, but it's extremely high diminishing returns after you do 2 or 3 high quality sprints, okay? You cannot move the needle much more after 2 or 3 good sprints. That is, if there's one thing I want you to remember, it's that. So that's the problem with a speed day. If you've done a speed day, it's been so long since I've done a speed day, and normally my speed days would be fairly sensible, but there are some people who just flog themselves with volume and then pull up unbelievably sore the next day to no one else's surprise, okay? So obviously that is going to be a big disadvantage to your training, is if you're doing a speed day and then starting, like a lot of the way I used to do it is I would have a rest day on a Saturday or a very light day, heavy Sunday, and then roll into the training week literally handicapped, okay? Avoid doing that at all costs. Training like a bodybuilder, okay? My man, Angus Bradley, again, God, he has some good fucking shit. A lot of what makes you move poorly or train badly is move poorly, perform poorly, is the training you're not doing. So training like a bodybuilder is great, okay? I've established many times on Instagram, training like a bodybuilder is one of the best things you can do, but then you have to do a couple other things on top of it. It's literally like a cherry on top, okay? You should understand that from all the stuff we've been talking about, okay? I think I can leave that one there, seriously. There is pretty much nothing wrong with traditional heavy, slow resistance training, okay? That is what I would define train like a bodybuilder as. As long as you are not an idiot, that is fairly similar to your definition as well. Now, train like an athlete. This is a big one, and there's just a lot of illogical things, okay? If we think about what one of the big things with train like an athlete is, it's mimicking the sport. And this ignores one of the most fundamental principles in skill acquisition And that's that coordination is task specific, okay? You cannot get better at another thing that is skill based by doing something that is not that, okay? So let's give an example. Sprinting, okay? Doing plyos or the little step up hops and that sort of thing cannot make you better at sprinting. It might improve your eccentric rate of force development or improve reactive strength index. Number one, we have better ways to do it than little crappy step ups. And number two, making it look like you're sprinting isn't transferring over. There's no skill transfer, okay? People will say that there is. And I can acknowledge that in beginners that's true, but you cannot extrapolate what's true for beginners to trained athletes, okay? If you are trying to get better at sprinting and you've been doing it for more than 3 months, you need to keep sprinting and you don't start adding in fluff, okay? If you have never sprinted in your life and you start adding in plyos, of course you're going to feel better at sprinting in the first few weeks, okay? That should be obvious and very logical. You should be able to walk that through step by step as to why that happens. It's because you have zero experience, okay? Now, if we talk about the other one is mimicking movements always, I'm not even going to say almost always. It always takes away from the actual adaptation we're trying to get, okay? So if you think about people doing run-specific step-ups, people doing anything run-specific, you're putting yourself in a weird position to train the target muscle, okay? Hip thrusts are the best glute exercise you can do. That's a fact. Nothing else is better than that. So if you say, I'm trying to train the glute in a different position, or I'm trying to improve my ability to extend the hip in low degrees of flexion, you should be doing a hip thrust. Sometimes there are objective best exercises, and I think people are scared to say that. Really avoid trying to mimic your sport or mimic movements, because the best thing to do is do the movement and then look at what are the best things to do for the adaptations that improve the performance of that movement, okay? That's our speed, that's our maximum strength. Power is an outcome from maximum speed and maximum strength, which then have their own subdivisions, okay? We can go up here and just break it down like a little family tree of adaptations, okay? I think that's going to be it. Well, I just want to summarize for you now. We're really close. The HPP method allows for similar prioritization of all qualities and acknowledges the physiological adaptations that lead to outcomes instead of pulling shit out of their ass. Okay, like I've said, these train like an athlete things, that train like a bodybuilder, it's pulling shit out of their ass and actually thinking about why or what leads to what they want, okay? So if we acknowledge the physiological underpinnings and we look at what's important, then we can get to an objective best exercise. Obviously, interpersonal circumstances change and the best for different people changes, but there's normally a best. Then when we look at hypertrophy, oh my God, everyone loves to act like their method is amazing when it's just based on hypertrophy. Anyone can get good gains with hypertrophy given enough exposure. So anyone who's lifted for 10, 15 years will be big as long as they lifted close to failure. If they volume belted themselves the whole time, fatigue maxed themselves the whole time, did really weird, really obscure rep schemes or exercises, if you do it for long enough and you're training close to failure, you will be big down the line. That doesn't mean you have a good method, okay? So HPP is the GOAT. If you want help implementing the HPP method, the high performance physiology method, work with me, okay? I've studied this, I've done exercise physiology, I've worked with lots of clients. I can help you implement this really easily and really smoothly, making simple tweaks that make big differences, okay? This is a really good opportunity. DM me on Instagram, send me an email, comment, I can reach out, okay? Thank you for watching. If you like the video, please drop a like and subscribe. I am going to keep trying to make the most detailed educational information I can of me literally just yapping to a camera. If you want to learn about something, comment it. I will do research. I will give you the best information. Thank you. Have a good day.